Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
If you would please introduce yourself and spell your name for us.
My name is Anna Cox, and it's spelled A-N-N-A, and Cox is spelled C-O-X.
Thank you, Ms. Cox. Ms. Cox, what do you do for a living?
I own my own private forensic consulting and training business.
And what does that entail? If you can explain that to the jury.
For the consulting part, I am contacted to either respond to active crime scenes to assist law enforcement agencies in processing and documenting the scene for bloodstain pattern analysis. I am also contacted for case file reviews by law enforcement attorneys or civil attorneys to provide a case file analysis regarding bloodstain pattern analysis if I am not requested to respond to the scene. For the training portion of my business, I provide bloodstain pattern analysis training throughout the state of Florida, as well as I have also taught in Illinois, providing agencies and attorneys with coursework on bloodstain pattern analysis.
What sort of prior education do you have?
For my brick and mortar education, I have a Bachelor of Science degree with my coursework in chemistry, biology, physics, their laboratory components, as well as calculus. I have a certificate in crime scene technology, which encompassed 10 courses for responding to crime scenes, such as photography, crime scene safety, fingerprint processing, chemical enhancement, etc. I have a certificate, graduate certificate in death investigation, and that included DNA serology, forensic anthropology, and forensic medicine 1, forensic medicine 2. I have a master's degree of forensic science with an emphasis in investigation. So that is also a field-based master's degree with additional coursework in photography, processing, chemical enhancement, crime scene investigation. As far as professional practitioner coursework, I have over 450 hours of practitioner coursework, which includes crime scene reconstruction, bloodstain analysis, fingerprint processing, response to domestic incidents, etc. And I have since, I would say 2013, I have actually taught over 1,000 hours of bloodstain pattern analysis and processing techniques.
How long have you been doing these type of analysis?
Well, I began my career as an autopsy technician, as a volunteer autopsy technician at the Hillsborough County Medical Examiners, and I began that in July of 2000. So my forensic career began back then. I was hired at the Pinellas County Sheriff's Office as a forensic science specialist, which is just a fancy term for a crime scene investigator. And my primary responsibilities there were to respond to crime scenes, to document, identify, collect, preserve, and process evidence. However, about a year and a half into the beginning of my career at Pinellas, I was approached by my section manager, who recognized my science background and asked me if I wanted to go into bloodstain pattern analysis. So I actually began my bloodstain pattern analysis training, which is a specialized training, in 2001, and have been working and focusing on blood analysis since then.
All right. Have you ever testified as an expert on bloodstain analysis in court?
I have.
Approximately how many times and where?
I've testified in 11 counties in Florida. I've testified in federal court, civil court, as well as Terrebonne Parish in Louisiana. I've testified as an expert in blood analysis, I want to say approximately at least over 50 times.
Okay. Judge, at this time, I don't know if the defense has any questions.
No questions. All right.
Thank you. Now, explain to the jury, what is a bloodstain pattern analysis?
Bloodstain pattern analysis is a discipline of forensic science where we focus on identifying, defining, documenting, and analyzing bloodstains that are present at a particular crime scene in order to provide an interpretation of the events and the mechanisms that has caused their distribution. So another way to put it is I analyze the blood to try to figure out how the blood was deposited, and sometimes we can sequence when the blood was deposited as opposed to other blood stains or patterns at the scene.
Did you prepare, in preparation for today, a PowerPoint to kind of describe to the jury what bloodstain pattern analysis means and how you do it?
I did.
All right. And would that assist you think, in explaining to the jury what your role and what you do in these kind of cases?
Yes.
All right. I'm going to put it on the screen here. Judge, this is going to be a court exhibit that we are placing up here.
All right, we'll just call it Court Exhibit 1 for the record.
Yes, Judge, that'd be
All right,
great. Okay. Now, Ms. Cox, I'm going to have you just kind of go through this with me. Let me see if I can figure out how to get this on the slideshow. There it is up here. Okay. So I'm going to have you kind of explain to me. So obviously this first page is just the your title for this definition. If you can go ahead and explain what this is here.
So when we do bloodstain pattern analysis, there are a lot of things that we have to consider. The first thing is what we consider is the physical characteristics of the bloodstains. And that is going to be your physics component of blood analysis. So that is going to be the size, the shape, and the distribution of the bloodstains at the scene. We also take a look at the number of bloodstains in order to determine is it a pattern? Or is it a single deposition, or were there multiple depositions, multiple activities that have occurred in this particular area or location? We also have to look at the location and the surface itself that the bloodstains are on. And that is because different surfaces can have a different effect on the bloodstain pattern. For example, smooth surfaces obviously receive bloodstains differently than coarse or porous surfaces would. We also look at the relationship of the bloodstains to other evidence, and that is where my background as a crime scene investigator and the fact that I do still respond to active crime scenes becomes into play, because I understand the following two variables that can also have an effect on blood distribution. That would be the scene-specific variables, how the room is set up, temperature, have there been any alterations. We also have to take a look at the history of the scene and the evidence to see how items were collected, their original locations, those types of things. So bloodstain pattern analysis encompasses analyzing not just the actual physical visual blood at the scene, but all of the other dynamics related to that particular scene.
So, and I guess the next slide, so there is a scientific basis for this bloodstain pattern analysis, is that correct?
Yes. Bloodstain pattern analysis is entrenched in the natural sciences. Biology is an important component of bloodstain pattern analysis. And as an analyst, one of the things I have to understand is how the body reacts to the infliction of an injury. So, for example, an artery has a different purpose inside your body than your vein does. So I have to have a fundamental knowledge of that, as well as once the blood has left the human body, it can undergo decomposition due to environmental factors. So I have to take into consideration that when I view blood stains, they may not always be a bright, vibrant red, and that can be due to some of the conditions at the actual scene. The other component that was especially evident in this particular incident was the physics. And blood, we have two different types of activities that can cause a distribution of blood. One is the natural science or the natural laws of physics, and that would be the natural laws of gravity. For example, if you had cut your hand and you were standing over the sink and the blood was just allowed to drip down off your hand, that is what we consider to be a passive action. There's no real external force that's coming in to override the body's natural function of bleeding or the natural laws of physics of gravity. Another type of mechanism that does disrupt the natural laws of physics or does disrupt the natural function of the human body would be something called the introduction of a mechanism such as force. So that would be kicking, stomping, stabbing, beating, shootings, something where a force is actually introduced to the blood, causing it to be disrupted and distributed in a completely different manner than the natural laws of physics.
All right. So your next slide talks about identifying blood stains and pattern. Are the following examples some ideas or some samples of some patterns that you use?
Yes, the following examples are examples of blood stains and patterns that were visible in this particular incident, but the ones for this particular slideshow are from training materials.
Okay, so the following slides we're about to see were not taken from this case at all, correct?
Correct.
Okay. All right, what does this slide show, or what is this slide demonstrating?
So this slide demonstrates what can occur when an outside force comes in and disrupts the natural laws of physics. The amount of force introduced to the blood stain, the more energy or the more force impacted onto the blood, the smaller the stains will be. So, for example, this is something called blood spatter, and that is a blood stain resulting from an airborne drop created when the external force is introduced to the liquid blood. Now, these are what we call impact spatter patterns, and that is when an actual object is striking the liquid blood. The interesting thing or the demonstrative thing about these two slides is if you look at the slide on the left, you see it kind of forms a conical formation, almost like a cone, where towards the bottom of the photograph, the stains are a little bit more dense. Some of them are circular in formation, and that is because the actual source of blood was in very close proximity to that area of that particular cardboard surface. As the blood source is further away and the blood is allowed to travel up in the conical formation, you'll actually see it becomes more sparsely distributed, and you'll actually start to see an elongation of your blood stains. And that becomes relative or important when I'm attempting to approximately determine the possible location of the blood source when it was impacted.
Okay. So what is directionality?
Directionality is the characteristic of a blood stain that would indicate the direction the blood was traveling or moving when it made contact with the surface. So at the time of its deposition on the surface, if it is elongated and has a tail that you see in this particular photograph, it tells me the direction the blood was actually moving. So the blood was traveling from left to right.
Okay.
And we call that our leading edge, and then the tail is what is actually pointing the direction the blood is moving.
Okay. And what are we looking at in this slide?
This is a flow pattern, and a flow pattern is, once again, this is another passive action. This is not the same as spatter. This is completely different. This is a blood stain that has resulted by the movement of a volume of blood on a surface due to gravity or the movement of the surface. So one of the distinguishing characteristics of the flow pattern is it appears to be almost linear, and it has delineated perimeter edges, forming basically a passive elongated stain traveling downward.
All right. And what are we looking at in this particular slide?
This is also considered to be a passive action. This is something called satellite staining, and this is when a smaller blood stain is formed when the parent stain or the original blood stain actually makes contact with the surface. So what happens is, and the perfect example of this is if you watch a Florida thunderstorm. If you watch a Florida thunderstorm and you're looking at your driveway and you're watching the rain come down, you'll see it'll hit your driveway and smaller drops will actually bounce up and outward. That is exactly what satellite staining is. So this is different from impact spatter. This is the blood actually making contact with the surface, and either due to the rapid distribution of the blood or the surface itself or both, the blood bounces and breaks out around it. And what you'll see a lot of the time, as you do in the slide on the right, is you'll see a lot of little tiny stains that surround what we call the larger parent stain, and it tends to be rather uniform in distribution, unlike what you saw with the impact spatter.
And what is in this slide?
This is also a passive action. This is pooled blood and saturation. The actual mechanism is the same. A blood source is just allowed to bleed freely onto a surface. Pooled blood is a hard surface. Saturation is an absorbent surface. But once again, it is a passive action where bloodletting has occurred and the blood is just being deposited and following either the topography of the hard structure or the actual textile design.
And then in this slide, we're talking about transfer. What is that?
Transfer is also what we consider to be a passive action. It is a blood stain that results from contact from a pre-existing wet blood surface or item onto another surface. So once again, the bloodletting event has already occurred or is occurring, and an item is contaminated with the wet blood coming into contact with another surface, depositing the blood onto that secondary surface.
And you indicate on the slide, it looks like that some of these can be comparable and some are not.
Correct. So a transfer stain, you can get fingerprints, bloody shoe prints, bloody tire marks, bloody weapon impressions. Sometimes you have a transfer from an item and the characteristics are not distinguishable, but the mechanism and the action is still the same. It's just the wet surface coming into contact with the secondary surface.
And this is a drip stain. What is that?
That's a blood stain that falls from a blood source due to gravity. So this would be the example of if you've cut your hand and you're rendering aid to yourself over the sink and blood is just dripping down. The two slides show the drastic difference between a smooth surface and a coarse surface. So the photograph on the left is basically blood drops on a smooth surface. They have a nice uniform perimeter. The other blood stain is on cardboard, which is a little bit more textured. So it broke the stain, but the actual deposition was still what we consider to be passive.
All right. And finally, what is Castoff?
Castoff is where a blood stain results from blood being released from an object due to its motion. That motion can be a swinging, a flinging, a strong push or movement of a bloodied item. And what happens is either the sudden movement forward or the sudden movement backward of the item will cause blood to be flung off. So, for example, if I had blood on my hand and I swung it, that would cause what we consider to be Castoff.
And you're able to differentiate that from other types of blood stains?
Correct, yes.
All right, thank you, Ms. Cox. So, Ms. Cox, were you in fact hired by the state of Florida in this case?
I was.
All right. And you were given some materials in order to give an opinion regarding the blood stains in this particular case. Is that correct?
Correct.
What materials were you given to analyze in this case regarding the death of Jermaine Bass?
I received multiple items. The items that I used for my analysis included body-worn camera footage, and I received multiple body-worn camera footages, so I watched them and I found 4 that provided me the information that I needed regarding the condition of the scene upon first responders' arrival. I also received photographs, including photographs of the scene and evidence collected from the scene, photographs taken at the hospital of both children as well as the parents. I received autopsy photographs of Jayla Bass, and I also received photographs of the clothing that had been collected from the children and from Mr. Bass. I received medical examiner reports and forms. I received the Hillsborough County Sheriff's Office crime scene reports. I received the Hillsborough County Sheriff's Office reports authored by the first responders and detectives. I received property and evidence lists, 911 phone call, a Florida Department of Law Enforcement biology report, and a Pure Gold forensic report as well. There were other items that I received that were not utilized in my analysis.
All right. And so what do you do when you start to make analysis? If you can kind of explain to the jury what your process is.
If I'm afforded the opportunity, the first thing that I like to do is I like to look at the body-worn camera footage, and that is because that is the scene as it was when the actual first responders arrived. So that would be even before the arrival of the crime scene unit, which is called after the scene has been secured and the scene is ready to be processed by the crime scene unit. So I like to look at the body-worn camera footage, and I watch that with the sound off. So I'm just interested in watching the movements of the first responders, the movements of anybody in the scene, the location of people in the scene, the location of blood evidence in relationship to the people at the scene. It also provides me the opportunity, especially if the individuals who were injured at the scene are not present at the scene when the crime scene unit responds, it allows me to see the condition of those individuals prior to the transport. So I like to look at that first. And as I'm going through, what I'm doing is I'm looking at the blood evidence. I'm starting to apply the definition to them based on their characteristics. And then I like to look at the crime scene photographs because they're more deliberate. They provide me overall mid-range close-up documentation of the evidence. It also gives me a clearer picture of the location of the evidence in relationship to other evidence or other items at the scene. The next thing I like to do is I will continue to watch the body cam video. I will also continue to look at the photos, but now I'll look at what I consider to be the technical reports first. So I'll look at the technical reports, which included the autopsy report, because that is going to be my medical report regarding Jayla Bass. Then I will go and I will read the crime scene technician reports, because those are also technical reports. That provides me information that I may not be able to see in crime scene photographs. So it provides me, also provides me information of the condition of items that were collected, whether areas were tested to determine whether or not it was possibly blood, what items, what are they going to be categorized under in property and evidence lists. So I like to read those reports. And then I'll read the property and evidence lists. I'll listen to the 911 call, and then I'll proceed to read through the first responder reports to see if they include any technical information related to the physical evidence that may be pertinent to my analysis and review.
All right. So, for instance, in this case, you mentioned body-worn cameras. I'm just going to use this as an example. Did you receive the body-worn camera of Deputy Nathaniel Jones showing him taking the child, Jayla Bass, off from her position and putting her on the ground?
I did.
Okay. So, as a result of that, you were able to see the positioning of Miss Jayla Bass when she was first observed, correct?
Correct.
And did that help you in your analysis?
Very much.
Okay. Now, prior to trial, you and I have spoken, correct?
Correct.
All right. And were you asked to provide a grouping of photographs that would help you and assist you in explaining to the jury your findings in this case?
Yes.
Okay. I'm showing what's already been admitted into evidence of State's Exhibits 24A through LL. Do these appear to be the photographs that you wanted to use in your PowerPoint?
Can I remove
Yes.
this?
No, I'm going to go back. No, use it. I'm just going to the jury has them. Thank you.
Yes, those are the photographs
Okay.
that I selected.
And you use these particular photographs that are in State's exhibit that's already been admitted in evidence 24A through LL. These are the photographs you used in putting together a PowerPoint to assist you in presenting this evidence to the jury. Is that correct?
Yes.
All right. And do you believe that PowerPoint would aid you in describing to the jury your findings in this case?
Yes.
And Judge, I am now going to be going back to the court exhibit and showing the second PowerPoint presentation contained on the thumb drive.
All right.
All right, so I'm going to just go through the slides and have you explain the significance of each of these slides to the jury as far as your findings in this particular case. Okay?
Okay.
All right, so explain this first slide, if you could, for the jury.
So the one of the first conclusions that I came to was one of the first things that I attempted to do with my blood analysis was to identify the location of Jayla Bass and Jermaine Bass when the actual gunshot wounds occurred. So what I'm looking for is going to be impact spatter. So that would be the spatter that takes on the conical nature, and that is going to be from the actual gunshot wounds themselves. So when I review all the blood stains and patterns, the only area that I identified where there was impact spatter that would be consistent with receiving the gunshot wounds is the northwest corner of the top bunk bed. And so what I did, now there's multiple photographs from multiple angles of that particular area. So I used all of the photographs that were provided to me, but these are the ones that best allow me to describe my findings. So the first thing that I looked at, the top left corner, which is the SLB_105 photograph. That is what would be considered to be a mid-range photograph of the west end of the bed, including the northwest corner. So the northwest corner is going to be that corner of the bed that the pillow is not in. So what I identified in that particular area is on the railing that faces inward toward the mattress, the west side, which would be the short side that the pillow's up against, that has impact spatter on it. The other area that was of interest was the actual corner where the two railings meet. That has impact spatter on it as well. Then you also have a little bit of impact spatter on the long railing at the corner, but you have the conical impact spatter that actually radiates upward from that corner, upward in that conical fashion onto the wall above the bed. So that indicated to me that understanding the location of the gunshot wounds, that there were 3 to the head of Jayla and 1 to the head of Jermaine and 1 to the hand of Jermaine, that those areas of their person, their heads and his hand, needed to be in that corner. And they also have to be relatively either on the mattress or on the pillow and on the mattress in order for the blood to have the target of the bed frame as well as the wall to have received the blood spatter. So that tells me that their heads are low, either immediately on or just right above the mattress.
Okay. And the area that's circled on the bottom photograph, there's a green marker in there, and you're familiar with crime scene investigations and stuff. Were you familiar with the fact, or did you know that that was an area that was swabbed for DNA?
Yes, that's a very traditional form of crime scene documentation. You do your overall photographs first, document the scene as it was upon your arrival, and then as a crime scene investigator, we are trained to let the scene tell us what needs to be documented with scales and what warrants more and more detailed documentation. Very traditional crime scene documentation. I understood exactly what those scales meant. They used 2 different colors, very traditional way of distinguishing between 2 types of evidence. I understood that the green scale was for the impact spatter that was on the wall, and the yellow scale was for the defect to the bed frame. Absolutely understood that.
All right. And what was the results of the DNA on that bloodstain spatter on area P?
That resulted in a mixture of both children.
Okay. And so, is it your opinion, Ms. Cox, that both the individuals both received their injuries on this corner of the bed?
Yes.
Okay. And so it's your opinion then that their heads were both close together to that side and that area of the bed?
When each of them received the gunshot wounds, their heads and possibly Jermaine Bass's hand were in that corner.
Is there anything else from these slides that you feel like you need to talk about, or can we go to the next slide?
Go to the next slide.
Okay. All right, and what are we looking at in this slide, second slide?
So this is just what would be considered a close-up photograph, and this is a photograph facing the actual north wall. So the corner's kind of off to the left-hand side. You can see the saturated pillow, but you can see how the blood stains radiate upward, not only from on the frame, but also up onto the wall. The next area that was of interest to me was what allowed me to place the incident occurring in the northwest corner was once the pillow was removed from the bed frame, there is a distinct stop to the impact spatter on the west side of the frame. Blood follows the laws of physics. So blood is going to travel and attach itself to something until it either can no longer do so or it's already attached itself to something. So the fact that the blood on the west frame abruptly stopped indicated to me that that pillow was most likely in that location when the actual gunshots occurred. So that is just me being able to apply the other evidence in order to allow me to be a little bit more defined with my conclusions. And that is also, that was done sequentially, which is a very traditional type of crime scene documentation. You photograph things, then you move things, then you re-photograph things.
And let me ask you that, Ms. Cox, while we're on the subject of that, because you talk about a lot that you've done this before. You've been a crime scene investigator. You go out, you know how they're done. Do you swab every single piece of blood that you see anywhere at every crime scene?
No, it's very customary to take representative swabbings.
Okay. And when you take representative swabbings, do you look for areas that you believe are relevant based on the bloodstain pattern and things of that sort?
Yes, your amount of training, both professional training, practitioner training, brick and mortar training, as well as your training in just responding to crime scenes on a daily basis, that is why one of the reasons is we have to consider all of the scene-specific variables, because the scene will tell you and help guide you to allow you to collect the evidence that may be probative in a future investigation.
Okay. So it's very common to have a crime scene with, bloodstains all scattered throughout, but you would only swab specific areas that you believed were pertinent.
Objection, leading. Sustained.
Okay. So in an area with numerous blood stains throughout, you would not scrub all of or swab all of them? You would pick certain ones?
Correct.
Okay.
And I still do.
Okay. What are we looking at in this slide here?
This is, as soon as you enter the south bedroom, the children's bedroom, as soon as you look over to where the bunk beds are, this is, you can see like it's either a dollhouse or a makeshift kitchen toy that's up against the west side of the bed. So you can see the top bunk is higher than the actual toy that is sitting on the floor, even though it is a rather large toy. What is of interest to this is now the stains and patterns that I'm analyzing are not by force. The stains and patterns that I have conclusions on from hereafter are what are all considered to be passive. So I've already identified the area where the gunshot wounds occurred. Now I'm identifying what is happening after the bloodletting events have occurred. What this particular photograph and then the photograph, well, actually what both of these photographs show me is that not only do I have saturation to the top of the mattress in the corner, once again, this is in the northwest corner, the saturation is such that the textile itself is starting to have it overflow onto the west edge of the mattress. So what's happening is the blood is continuing to be deposited in this area from the gunshot injuries, and the blood is actually coming up over and cascading down the side of the mattress, and it actually cascades all the way down to where it starts to drip on the slats of the bed below. It also continues to do that on the north side of the mattress on the other side. So what that tells me is that the bleeding that is occurring after the gunshot injuries is being confined to that particular area as the bloodletting injuries are being allowed to flow freely and flowing down over the mattress and onto the wall and the bed below.
Okay, and you mentioned something a minute ago that brought up a point that I hadn't asked you yet. That area that you described in the first slide, where you said this is where they were shot, that was blood spatter that you said was from a bloodletting event, right? Is that how you describe it?
Correct.
Okay. That was the only place in all of this areas that you were able to analyze that you found that occurred, correct?
Correct.
All right. Did you find anywhere else where there could have been potentially a gunshot?
There was no other impact spatter other than the northwest corner.
All right, thank you. All right, what are, in this slide here, with SLB 348 and SLB 347, what are we looking at of these in these pictures?
This is, once again, further on in the documentation process. You can see that the toy that was originally up against the west end of the bed has been moved, and they're just taking additional photographs. So it's a sequential processing technique that's very common. And what you're seeing in the first photograph, which is indicator 348, you have almost a straight-on view of the top bunk, and you actually can see the flow patterns that are coming over the top of the bunk and down the west side of the bunk bed. The photograph that's identified as 347 is an actual photograph looking down at an angle towards the bottom bunk area. You can see that the bottom bunk, the bed, the actual mattress itself did not fit the frame. So you can actually see that there is a rather significant area where there is no mattress. So the slats of the bed frame are actually exposed, and you can just now start to see that the blood has been dripping down, and it's actually dripping down and hitting the slats and bouncing out. And that's your satellite staining, like your rainstorm. So that's what's occurring there. So once again, that is indicating to me that the blood source is in the northwest corner and is bleeding uninterrupted as the blood is flowing downward.
In our next slide, what do we see here?
So this became even more evident. Now we're looking at the north side of the mattress that was originally in contact with the frame against the wall. So this is once again further on in the documentation process where they have taken a downward photograph to identify the location of not only the dowel rod, but also the relationship of it to the mattress. What's of interest to me is I'm starting to see what's called coagulation, which is where the blood is actually starting to become gelatinous and coagulate and start to adhere to itself, and it's forming almost like an outline. And the second slide was demonstrated to me what I had already started to believe was that is where Jermaine Bass's head was laying. And that was confirmed when I kept reviewing the body cam video. I was able to see in the body cam video the proximity of her head, and that is where her face and her head was lying while the blood was starting to coagulate around her and then drip down the north side of the mattress, and then it began to drip down the wall, the north wall.
And is this just more of a close-up shot of what you were just describing?
That's a close-up shot, which gives you a more of an indication of the, not only can you see the blood that's coming down on the north side and the coagulation, but you can also see the another saturation stain just above it, and you can see where that's going down the west side. So you basically have two areas where the blood is actually coming over down the side of the actual mattress.
Okay. What do we see in this particular slide here?
So at this point, this is documentation of the wall and the bottom bunk. So this is the area underneath the top bunk. Once again, what was significance to me is if you look at where the flow pattern is on the wall and the satellite staining on the wall, as well as the pooled blood on the wooden slats and all that, that is all also in the northwest corner, which is at this point now everything that is related to this particular, the impact spatter and then the individuals laying on the mattress and bleeding downward is all in the northwest corner. And that is just solidified when you look at the relationship of the downward flow pattern on the wall as well as the satellite staining.
So for instance, in SLB 304, the middle picture towards the bottom, I'm going to move my cursor. Here's the cursor here. There's these along the top up here. What is that along the top ledge of the bunk bed?
That is actual blood that has dripped off the mattress onto the frame and dripping down onto the frame below.
Okay, and then on SLB 120, this area here, that is not spatter, you're saying?
Correct. That is not impact spatter. The reason I was able to distinguish between that and I was able to identify that as satellite staining was because of the scene-specific variables of this particular case. So I was able to take into consideration the saturation stain above to the mattress above, the flow pattern on the wall that travels down the wall, the flow patterns on the mattress. There's additional photographs where these items have been removed and you can actually see where the blood is starting to pool on the bottom frame, on the wooden slats, and on the floor below because it's just being allowed to drip down. So that is a perfect example of I need to have an understanding of the scene-specific variables and dynamics here. There was another thing that was important for me to consider, which was there's a towel and a stuffed animal that is laying on top of the slats. Well, the towel is also receiving blood. Now, because that's a porous surface, it's going to interact a little differently when it receives the blood than the hard frame is. So that's why some of the stains look a little distorted, or a non-technical term, a little wonky, is because that is a very specific scene variable that did have an effect on how some of those blood stains were distributed. So that's an example of the history and variables of the scene coming into play in the analysis.
Okay, and you have a yellow arrow that indicates an area R. What is the area R? Is it that green, and I'll move the cursor to the, is it that green sticker that's on the lower part of this picture, closest to the towel in the blood pattern?
Yes, so the stickers identified, they were green, so that identified the blood, that was a blood substance. And also that was confirmed in the report that I read from the technician who documented this scene. And then when I went and looked at the DNA report, knowing that that area had been tested, that was also an area that was a mixture of both children.
Okay, so what does that tell you, the fact that both Jermaine and Jayla's DNA is in that blood stain down there?
That would indicate that they were both actively bleeding in the northwest corner of the top bunk while the blood was deposited over the sides of the mattress and down onto the bottom bunk.
Okay, so to be clear, the blood that's dripping down is a combination of both of the children.
That's what the DNA results indicated to me.
And I guess what do we have? These are closer up views of those?
Correct. So in slide 305, the first slide on the left, you can actually see the flow pattern. It's a very delineated downward flow pattern. It's got the delineated perimeter lines, and it's just the blood following the laws of physics, just going down the wall based on gravity. The secondary photograph, identified as 307, that shows you not only do I have different surfaces, so I have a hard, like painted wood frame, which is a little bit smoother. I have the towel, which is an absorbent surface, which is going to react differently to the blood. Then I have the wooden slats that are part of the frame for the mattress that aren't necessarily as smooth as the actual gray frame. So those are three different surfaces that I have to take into consideration, and that explained to me why I have such a variety of the satellite stains and why some of them are in different locations than others. Because, and not only that, I have different levels. So the gray wooden frame is higher than the wooden slat frames, and then you have the towel, which is higher than the wooden frame, but then drooping down between the frames. So those are all variables that I have to consider.
Right. And the blood on the slats, would that blood have come all the way through the mattress, or would it have been still from the ones that were coming over the side?
It would be the ones coming over the side, and I actually considered that. And so what I did was I looked at the photographs where the mattress had been cut and one of the projectiles removed, because that is something that I had to consider, and so I was able to exclude that.
Okay, so it just came from the side and then just dripped down into there.
Correct.
All right. And what do we see in this one, in this particular photo?
This is a photograph which is demonstrating the distance from the wall to the mattress that did not fit the frame. And it's also just giving a downward perspective of the stains and patterns in relationship to each other, showing the different elevations as well as the different locations of the blood on the different areas.
And again, this area towards the left of the picture, where the cursor is right now, that is satellite staining. That is not from a shot or anything like that.
Correct. That is not impact spatter.
Okay. So what is this slide demonstrating here?
So on this slide, the sketch at the bottom is mine. I am a very visual person. It's easier for me to put words into a picture. And so what I did was I made my own computer aid sketch to allow me to articulate my findings a little bit more clearly. So what I did was I took not only the photographs and the body-worn camera information, but I also took the information from the DNA reports regarding the blood evidence, and I put together that sketch. And what that sketch allowed me to do was to confirm what I had already spoken about earlier, which was the gunshot injuries occurred in the northwest corner, and then both children are laying in the northwest corner. And that is reflected, as you can see on the sketch. You can see the overall, all of the evidence together. So you can see P is the impact spatter on the top bunk, and R is the satellite staining on the bottom bunk, and they are both in the northwest corner. And those are the two areas that are the mixture.
Okay. And did you consider N, M, and L as far as your analysis? Those, because each of those came back to Jermaine Bass, the son, correct, JJ?
As did O.
As did O.
Yes.
Okay. And what are we looking at here?
So this is a Star Wars blanket, and it's actually not a blanket. It's more of a comforter, but it's rather large. It was documented back at the crime scene section with actual dimensions being measured. So it's actually a little bit of a larger comforter. Then there's also like a fuzzy Super Batman blanket that's also kind of rolled up within that. So when we have a bloodstain case that I'm analyzing, I need to be respectful of all the bloodstains and patterns that are present at the scene, even if they may not be directly related to the bloodletting incident while it's occurring. In this instance, the gunshot wounds. There's a bunch of transfer stains that are at the end of the bed, on the opposite end of the bed. So when I'm looking at these, the Star Wars comforter and this Batman blanket, one of the things that initially that I observed was there are blood stains on this comforter where there's no blood source for them to have received it. So for example, in the second photograph, photograph 376, you can see that there's blood on the corners or the portions of the comforter that is facing upward in the air, where there's no blood in the air providing deposition of blood on those areas of the comforter. That tells me that that comforter received those blood stains prior to coming to rest in that location. That's the first hypothesis that I come to, because I follow the scientific methodology. So that's the first thing that I'm notating is this comforter has blood on it in areas that's not in contact with a blood area. The other thing I noticed was there appears to be some blood stains and patterns possibly under the comforter. So now I need to determine whether or not the blood on the comforter came from the blood on the bed at the opposite end, or is this comforter getting its blood staining at the northwest end of the bed and then being moved to that end. Body cam, when Jayla Bass is first observed, you can see a portion of the blanket on her legs, and it's actually pushed off of her by the first responder. That is actually also notated in a report that I read. One of the reasons I read their reports as well. So those were things I considered. As the processing continued, those blankets and comforters are removed, and there are in fact transfer stains underneath them. They don't have the amount of blood volume that has caused the saturation that I observed to these items, which indicated to me it is most consistent that that blanket received blood at the northwest end of the bed prior to being moved to the northeast or the east end of the bed.
Okay. And what are we looking at in this slide?
This is the area underneath the where the comforter and the blankets were. And you can also see that there are transfers on the wall and on the bed frame. And that is indicative of that comforter was contaminated with enough wet blood that it caused the transfer stains and small saturation stains that end of the bed. So that is how I had formulated a hypothesis and then came to the conclusion that it's most consistent with those items being further west on the bed prior to coming to rest there.
All right. And then SLB 004, this is just the blanket laid out.
This is the blanket that was actually laid out, and there are yellow defect circles that encased some areas of on the blanket. So I was originally interested in how much saturation or how much blood was in fact on these blankets to determine if I could just take it one step further to confirm my findings that the blanket was the most consistent cause of the transfer stains down at the east end. But then something else caught my eye, and so I requested testing on this item.
All right. And is that what we're talking about here in SLB 19 and 21?
Yes, so I'm looking at the blood on the item that was documented back at their crime lab in their controlled environment. And, you know, you have some defects to the blanket and there's no blood around them. What was interesting to me on this particular area of the blanket, I have a saturation stain and it's encased as number 6 with a defect. One of the things I do, I request photographs be given to me on a digital medium so that I can look at them close up. I can zoom in, I can focus on certain areas if I need to. And as I was looking at area 5 and 6, what was really interesting to me was area 6 was a defect, and right next to it was an area of dark saturation that had a foreign substance mixed in with it. And I thought that looked a lot like possible biological tissue. So I requested that the blood from area 6, that general area, be tested to determine whose it possibly could be.
And was it in fact tested?
It was.
And were you given the results?
I was.
And whose blood was it?
Jermaine Bass's.
The Junior, the son.
The son.
Yes, it's confusing sometimes because they're both named Jermaine, so I sometimes have to clear that up.
Okay, yes.
So is this what you're talking about when you talk about being able to zoom in? These are more zoomed
Correct.
in photos?
Yes, so you can see that in right adjacent to the defect that has saturation not only around it, but inside the fibers of the hole. You can see the possible biological material that is right next to it.
Is that in number 5?
Correct.
All right. And what does that tell you, or what does that help you form as an opinion with regards to that piece of evidence?
That defect, a projectile, was in close enough proximity to possible biological material when those were deposited.
Okay. Now you can't say specifically what biological material.
No.
Okay, so it could be from his hand, that his hand was shot.
Correct. He did have a gaping wound to hit his right palm area by his pinky. Yes.
Or possibly his head.
Or possibly his head. His head was bandaged in all the documentation that I saw.
Okay. But it's your opinion, though, that the substance in number 5 is some sort of biological material.
I believe it is consistent with that, with the experiences that I've had and the numerous amounts of bloodshedding events that I've worked.
Okay. Now, what are we looking at in this particular slide that talks about the movement of Jermaine Bass?
So, because I was able to see how Jayla Bass was removed from the bed, there was additional documentation of additional bloodstains and patterns on the mattress that I could not necessarily attribute to her. So, not seeing Jermaine Bass, the son, until the first place I observed him was on body cam, sitting on the adult Jermaine Bass's lap. So what I observed was that there are transfer stains that are along the south rail of the bed. So this is the side of the railing that is opposite the side of the wall. And there's a bunch of transfer stains over in that area as well. And what was interesting is in the second slide, 473, the transfer stains continue over towards the ladder and then they continue down the ladder. So you also have stains on the ladder itself. So that being consistent with possibly the son being removed from the bed, moving himself or being moved from the bed and down the railing. Now, I do want to make it clear that another person contaminated with the son's blood could have also deposited those blood stains while moving him. I can't exclude either one, so both of those are included.
Okay. And you determined that it was Jermaine Bass that was moved because obviously Jayla was still found where she was, but also based on the DNA results of O and the ones along the band or along the ladder. Is that right?
Correct.
Okay. And what are we looking at in these particular pictures, 267, 268, and 266?
Those are actual cast-off stains.
Okay, and what does that mean?
That is where an item that is contaminated with blood is swung or moved, and the blood is being swung or flung off that item due to its movement. Not at all surprised to see those, knowing that both children had bleeding injuries and had been removed from the bedroom. And so those cast-off stains were exactly where I would have anticipated they might have been. So there was nothing that I found inconsistent with the activity of removing them from the room.
Okay, so it'd be consistent if, say, they had them in the arms and they moved around like this, and some of the blood that's maybe starting to drip just kind of gets thrown to the side and lands on that stuff.
Correct.
Okay, all right. And on the stairs, this is similarly what you're notating here, or what are you looking at?
On the stairwell walls, you had a couple transfer stains, and you also had passive drip stains coming down the stairwell. Once again, very consistent with the action of the children being removed from the beds or being removed from the bedroom and being taken down the stairs and then being removed from the residence out the front door. Now, it may seem like that's obvious, but I have to be respectful of the fact that if there's bloodstains and patterns there that can be analyzed, I need to do that. So what I'm also showing is that the actions that I saw by first responders in removing Jayla was consistent with the blood that I saw there. There's nothing here that I found to be inconsistent with what the scene was already telling me.
All right. And then finally, I believe this may be your SLB 218 and 231. What are we seeing here?
There are some passive drip stains on the floor by the edge of the couch. There's also a transfer stain on the floor. There's transfer stain on the couch. Once again, I originally observed body-worn video showing adult Mr. Bass holding the child, Jermaine Bass, in that proximity of the couch. So once again, none of those stains to me were inconsistent or caused alarm for me. Was consistent with what I had seen on body-worn camera and the other dynamics of the scene. But once again, they needed to be identified and recognized for the analysis.
All right. I believe that's it. Okay. All right, if I could have one moment, Your Honor. All right, Ms. Cox, thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Good afternoon, Ms. Cox. How are you?
I'm good, thank you.
All right, so you were hired by the state of Florida in this case?
I was.
And specifically Mr. Terry, who works for the state attorney's office?
Yes, he was the one that contacted me.
Okay. And how much do you know, as of today's date, how much has the state attorney's office in the 13th Circuit paid you?
May I double check?
Yes?
$760.
Okay. Now, when we took your deposition, they had paid, at that point, $760. Is that correct?
Correct.
All right. So since that time, you gave a deposition.
That's correct.
Okay. And that bill had to go to my office, even though
Correct.
it's you're a state witness.
Correct.
All right. And you would have had depo prep.
I did.
Okay. You're being paid for your testimony today by the state of Florida.
I am being paid for my time.
Your time. Prep for your testimony with Mr. Terry. He even said that y'all had met and looked at the PowerPoint. You get paid for that time.
Yes.
You also are going to get paid for the PowerPoint that you put together that we just reviewed with Mr. Terry, correct?
For the time that it took me to put it together, yes.
Okay. So then, since it was already $760 before we took the depot, it's going to be above that at this point, correct?
Yes.
All right. And now the opinions that you have testified here today, those are your opinions and your conclusions, correct?
Correct.
All right. And you cannot tell this jury who pulled that trigger, correct?
I cannot.
All right. Just a little bit about the work that you do. Your percentage in terms of working for the police officers, their offices, the state of Florida, versus the defense. Give me an idea what the percentage or breakdown would be of how much you do for, say, state attorney's offices and police agencies versus a defense hiring you.
I would say it's about 70% state or law enforcement and about 30% defense.
Okay. So 70% of your work are police agencies, law enforcement, and state attorney's office, such as Mr. Terry's office.
I do get contacted by the state frequently, yes.
Okay. 70%.
Approximately.
That's okay. Yeah. All right. Now, based on the findings, you cannot say Mr. Bass discharged the firearm, correct?
I have no opinion on who actually pulled the trigger.
Okay. You cannot say whether the son pulled the trigger at any point. You cannot say Jayla pulled the trigger. You cannot say Shirley Bass pulled the trigger. You can't tell us who pulled the trigger.
I cannot.
Okay. Now, you are aware of the fact, and I think you just testified to it, that EMS brings Jayla down the stairs and out the front door.
Yes, I observed that.
Right, okay, and that's on body cam, I believe, correct?
Yes.
Right. And then you're aware from people telling you that Mr. Bass had brought his son down the stairs and over to the couch, because the coming down the stairs is not on the body cam, correct?
No, I observe the young son on the father's lap. That's the first time I see the son.
Okay, and you were advised he would have taken him down that staircase?
I cannot exclude that. That would be the most probable.
Okay. All right. Well, somehow he got from the top floor down.
I agree.
Okay. All right.
Yes.
And in terms of the staircase, there's nothing inconsistent with the fact that either child was carried, lifted, and moved down the staircase.
Oh, no, the blood's all very consistent with that.
And also consistent with the fact that Mr. Bass would be over on the couch holding his son, as you saw in the body cams.
Yes, the blood that I saw outside the bedroom was consistent with that, yes.
Okay. All right. Now, you also have no opinion on which child may have been shot first, correct?
That's correct.
All right. Now, I want to just talk to you a little bit more. Mr. Terry, I thought, was making a comment and had asked you about that both children's heads are together, and I might have misunderstood what he said. You're not testifying that these two, Miss Bass and Jermaine Bass, the son, that their heads are together when they're shot, correct?
Their heads are in the northwest corner.
Okay, that's what I wanted to clarify. So you're not saying head, they're together, they're right next to each other. You're not saying that.
I'm just saying they're in the northwest corner.
Okay. And in fact, you cannot give an exact position of Jayla Bass, correct?
I can give you the approximate location of her head, but the rest of her body I can't, except for what I observed on body cam.
Okay. So let me ask you the question again. You cannot give us an exact position of the children and where they are, correct?
Their heads are in the northwest corner when the gunshots are inflicted.
Jayla's head was in close proximity to the northwest corner and north railing, correct?
Yes.
That is your opinion?
That is the northwest corner, yes.
Okay. And again, that is her head being in close proximity to that corner, correct?
That is correct.
Okay. Do you remember testifying in deposition that you cannot give an exact position of the children?
Can you tell me exactly what page you're talking
Yes.
about? Okay.
Give me one moment, Ms. Cox. Ms. Cox, if you could refer to your deposition taken in late December of last year, bottom of page 24. Just go ahead and look at it to yourself. You might want to read a couple questions about that.
Okay, I'm here.
All right, do you see that? Mm-hmm. All right. Now, in fact, when I asked you the question, do you have an opinion, Ms. Cox, as to where Jayla Bass was at the time she sustained her injuries, the first thing out of your mouth, I can't give you an exact position. Do you see that?
Yes.
All right, and then you went on, I can give you the proximity of her head because that's where her bloodletting injuries were. So her head was close proximity to the northwest corner, in close proximity to the north railing, which would be the railing or the frame that's against the wall. That was your answer to my question in December of last year, correct?
Yeah.
So you see where I'm getting at is I was asking you, you cannot give us an exact position of the children, but you can only tell us that Jayla's head was in close proximity to that northwest wall and frame.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. That will be the same with Jermaine the child as well, will it not? That all you can tell us is that his head and possibly his right hand was in proximity to the northwest corner, correct?
Yes.
All right. So certainly you also cannot give us an exact position of Jermaine Bass' child.
I can just tell you that his head and hand were at the northwest corner, in proximity to the northwest corner.
Close proximity to the northwest corner.
Yes, because
Right.
all the blood is in the northwest corner.
Okay. So you agree with me on all that, right? Can't give the exact position. The best you can do is give the opinion you've gave here today. Right?
I can give you the exact location of where the blood impact spatter is, and it's in the northwest corner.
No, you've already testified to that. We've already looked at the spatter. And the spatter's a mixture.
Correct.
Right, okay. My question to you was, and I believe you've answered it, is you cannot give us an exact position of those children on that top bunk.
I can tell you that their heads were in proximity to the northwest corner because all the blood is on the northwest corner.
So
That is related to the gunshot wounds.
Okay. I'll ask you again. You cannot give us an exact position of where those children were. Correct?
I cannot give you the exact position. I can just tell you that where the blood is and where their heads would have been in order for the blood to have gotten in the northwest corner. They have to be in proximity to it.
Proximity, exactly. All right. Now, Jayla, there could have been some movement concerning Jayla, or possibly some movement prior to her coming to rest in the position that you saw her in the body cam, correct?
Very minimal amount of movement, if there was any.
Yeah, and you can't really tell us or help us with that. In fact, in the depot, you deferred us to the medical examiner in terms of Jayla's movement, correct?
Her capabilities of movement, not whether there was significant movement by her, but whether she could have moved on her own.
Right, okay. Now, you saw, of course, on the body cam that comforter was moved over to the east end of the top of the bunk bed, right?
Yes, it was originally partially on her legs.
Right, okay. And it is your opinion that Miss Jayla Bass had laid in the position that she was seen in for a period of time, correct?
Yes.
And that was the area with the coagulation of the blood and the large staining.
The saturation and the dripping downward onto the bottom bunk, yes.
Okay. And it's your opinion that Mr. Jermaine Bass, the son, had moved from the west end of the bed over to the ladder And he could have moved there, or somebody could have moved him to that area, correct?
Correct.
So basically, Jermaine Bass, the son, his head is in close proximity, and maybe his hand, to the northwest corner. He's then coming to the west middle area of the bed, and then moved, and again, either himself or someone else, down the ladder. Correct?
That's consistent, yes.
Okay. I wanted to talk to you about the possible biological material that was on the comforter, correct?
That was on the, yes, the Star Wars Mandalorian comforter.
And we were seeing when Mr. Terry had the PowerPoint up, I believe that's photographs for trial. Just want to briefly ask you about that. See if is that one helpful there?
Yes, that's a good one.
All right. Now, who did these yellow markings and marked them 5 and 6?
That was done by the Hillsborough County Sheriff's Office crime scene technician.
Okay. And had you gone, in fact, to the Sheriff's Department to look at the comforter?
No.
Oh, did they send it to you? Or?
I didn't request to see it. I didn't need to. Her documentation was very, very good, actually, so I could work off of her work.
Okay. So you didn't actually see the comforter?
I worked off the photographs that I was provided.
Okay, so you're solely working off the photographs when it comes to your opinion concerning 5 and 6, correct?
Yes, and the fact that those markers had been put there intentionally by the technician as well.
All right. And you, in fact, had asked for the DNA testing to be done on that one spot, which is 6.
Correct, adjacent to the blood, the possible tissue. That is correct.
Okay. And that was the DNA that came back to the son, Jermaine Bass?
Correct.
All right. Did anybody ever tell you that item 5 was, in fact, biological material?
I didn't ask anybody. I am basing that on my experience, both in working crime scenes, having assisted in autopsies, and been to an extraordinary amount of bloodletting events where tissue and other foreign biological material has been expelled.
Okay. Did you ever discuss this biological material area with the Hillsborough County Sheriff's Office?
I've had no discussions with the Hillsborough County Sheriff's Office.
Okay. And are you aware of any DNA testing for the area depicted by number 5 that you believe is possible biological material?
I requested the area around the actual projectile defect be tested because that's directly related to the shooting itself.
So you asked for the DNA testing. I think we already established that for 6. Are you aware of any DNA results of the possible biological material you believe you see in the photographs in item 5?
Based on the dynamics, I believe it is most consistent with being from Jermaine Bass.
Okay. I asked you, my question just was, are you aware of any DNA results from the Florida Department of Law Enforcement or Pure Gold Forensics of DNA results that tell you who number 5 belongs to?
I didn't request it.
Okay. And you're not aware of any, correct?
I didn't request any, and I haven't been provided any.
Okay. Because you have the results from FDLE and Pure Gold Forensics.
Yes, I have those reports. I do.
All right. All right, and then you indicated in terms of the comforter, let's pull up, let's see. Yep, that's my mouse, that's why it's not working. All right, back to this photo. And for the record, a minute ago, I was at SLB. What does SLB mean, Ms. Cox?
That is, I believe it is the initials of the forensic tech who took the photographs. That's considered to be a digital identifier because there were multiple people that took photos, and that just allows people who come and do a case file review to understand who took what photos.
Okay. And for the record, a minute ago when we were discussing the 5 and 6 areas labeled by Ms. Spatter, that is identified in the PowerPoint by SLB 0022 and SLB 0023, or slide 15. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. I'm just documenting, make sure we know what we're talking about. All right. And then it looks like I am at slide number 12. It looks like we have photographs from Ms. Spatter again, 0113 and 0376. Now, you said something about you believe it is more consistent that the comforter had been, as you saw in the body cam, on the northwest end of the bed and had been moved over to the northeast corner, correct?
That's what's most consistent, yes.
Okay. And in fact, we see some of that right on the body cam, do we not?
That is correct.
Okay. So is it your testimony that any blood that's on the east end, which we have on the railing, we have on the wall, and we have on the mattress itself, any blood I see came specifically from that comforter? Is that your testimony?
The deposition of those transfer stains is most consistent with coming from the movement of the comforter to that area, being deposited by the wet blood on the comforter on the areas that it came into contact during movement, yes.
Okay, you're talking about transfer stains. Which ones are you speaking of?
There, if you look at the second photo that ends
Yes.
in, okay, so there's a transfer stain. If you go to the corner, right there, that's a transfer stain. And you can see it's in proximity to wet blood on the comforter. If you go to the actual east wall,
Over
you
here?
can see a transfer that's actually right above the wet corner of the comforter there. So those are some of the scene-specific variables that is consistent based in proximity of the evidence to each other.
Okay, and you say consistent, so you can't say for sure, but that's most consistent to you.
Correct.
Right. Also on that same frame, PowerPoint 12, I am taking my mouse here to some blood staining here, and there's some blood on the railing, and that is to the west of the comforter or the left of the comforter. Do you have an opinion as to how any of that blood was deposited?
Yes, that would also be consistent with, possibly most consistent with coming from the comforter, because as you proceed further to the left, that's where Jayla Bass's lower body was. So that was actually documented in the body cam that comforter was over in that particular area. And there's no blood source in that area to cause the contamination that I see on the comforter, which would just once again indicate that the comforter was further west, came to rest on Jayla Bass's leg, caused the deposition on the wall, moved down to the east end, caused the deposition on the walls. So that's actually the progression that the blood is telling me.
That comforter, as it's being moved, it's leaving these clues for you across the bed.
It's leaving blood deposition in some of the areas making contact with.
Okay. So in SLB 0113, this area of blood down here, and my mouse is towards the middle bottom portion, is it your opinion that that's from the comforter?
It is consistent with coming possibly from the movement of the sun from the bed. If the comforter came into contact with that area briefly, I can't exclude it. But based on the dynamics of the transfer patterns on the south side of the railing, the interior side of the railing, and the proximity of that to the railing, it's a progression also more consistent with the sun being moved or being removed from the bed.
Right. But we don't know specifically, say, for example, that blood stain that I'm highlighting again, 0113 towards the bottom middle, we don't know whose blood that actually is, correct?
That particular stain, no, but blood in proximity to it came back to being the little boy.
Right. Proximity, do you mean the one on the comforter?
No, the comforter and the railing.
Okay. All right. But we're looking at the east end of the bed, are we not at this point?
Yes.
Okay. And when you say the boy's blood, are you speaking of further down on the west end by the pillow, say, for example, being the boy's?
No, I'm talking about the testing on the railing. There was, I want to say, was it L, M, and O?
Yes.
Oh, no, not O. N, L, M, and N?
LMN.
Okay, I think it was those three that were tested, and that proximity of the railing and the ladder.
Okay. And in fact, the railing, and I'm just pointing to SLB 0376, we're looking at the comforter. If I was to go down from there, that's where the ladder is, right?
Yes,
There
it's
you
like
go.
right here.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Thank you for pointing that out to the jury. All right. In terms of this blood then over here, 0113, same slide, you cannot definitively sit here and tell us who this areas of blood belong to, correct?
It's consistent with being distributed by the comforter, and the testing that was done identified Jermaine Bass. Also, the blood associated that I've spoken to about Jayla and her position when I observed her, she didn't have blood on her lower body, and there was no blood on her person or any indication that she had been flipped over, like her head was down at that end of the bed and then she moved over. So based on those dynamics, it would be more consistent with that deposition coming from the comforter. And the area that I had tested came back to being the son's blood.
Okay. Is it your, okay, wait. So your testimony is SLB 0113. I'm looking right where the mouse is. It's some areas of blood there. It's on the back of the railing and is where the mouse is, correct? Mm-hmm. All right. And again, for the record, to the west, I guess, or to the left of the comforter. So your testimony, that was tested and came back as the son's?
It was not tested, but based on the scene-specific variables, there are some opinions that I can consider to be most likely based on the scene photographs and the blood analysis that I've done. And there was not significant movement of Jayla Bass. So I can put Jayla Bass in that general area up there in the northwest corner. I have no indications that she moved. Plus, all the blood that's on her at the scene is on her head and her upper body, which is in nowhere near that.
I'll ask you the question again. You cannot tell us whose blood that is, correct?
I can tell you who's most likely based on my analysis, but I did not have that DNA tested. I am basing that on my analysis and conclusions and the dynamics of this scene that I've discussed thus far.
Okay, that was that area right there where the mouse still remains, 0113, was not tested, correct?
I didn't request it to be tested. I don't have any reports that it was.
Right, okay. Let's see, States 22RR, I'm not sure if this picture does not look like it's not in the PowerPoint, so I'm going to show you that. Now, correct me if I'm wrong here, and this is the comforter marked by evidence marker 11. Is that correct?
I don't see it.
Oh, ooh, how do we switch back now? So I'm going to go away from the PowerPoint then
Okay.
at this point. Can I shut that off?
No, just
Sure.
leave it right
Okay.
there.
There we go. Thank you. All right. All right. Thank you, Ms. Cox. All right. So I have here, again, just for the record, 22RR. And this is the Mandalorian comforter marked by a evidence marker 11. Is that correct?
Yes, that's much further on in the documentation. Mhm.
Okay.
Yes.
I wanted to ask you then, would you agree with me that what I see in this picture, the Mandalorian blanket is not in the same position as what we just looked at in the PowerPoint?
No, this is further along in the documentation after they've removed casings, and they're just documenting that they're moving these particular items.
So what do you? Well, first of all, you weren't there, so you don't know what they did, right? You weren't there.
They did it sequentially in their photographs, so I'm able to follow exactly what they were doing.
Okay. So you're assuming that's what they did, correct?
Well, if you showed me the previous photographs, you would see the progression of how they're moving items. So that the photographs told me that was the progression.
Photographs told you that. All right. So are you saying then that the comforter was first in the northwest corner, somehow then it's moved to what we see in the picture, then it's moved again to what we saw in the PowerPoint?
No, the PowerPoint is first.
Okay.
This is later.
Gotcha.
And if you have the identifiers, the numbers actually identify the progression for you. So that's one of the ways to show the progression. And looking at the photographs as you keep moving further and further along, so this is very customary that as you're moving things, you document for this exact purpose, so there is no confusion about sequencing.
Yeah. So it's the ones we saw in the PowerPoint first, I'm not counting the northwest wall, and then this progression.
That's correct.
And we're seeing in this photo. Okay. The blood that we see in this area, where the comforter is not touching, you do not know whose blood that is, correct?
No, that area was actually under the comforter until it's moved, so it is consistent with deposition from part of the bloody area of the comforter, because there was multiple saturation stains on this comforter.
Okay. How do you know that?
Because there's photographs of both sides of the comforter taken back at the actual crime scene unit.
Okay. So is your testimony then that what we're looking at in this photo marked by evidence marker 11, that the comforter was on top of this area of blood?
The comforter, when it was documented in the photographs that I showed, that is where it was upon the arrival of the crime scene unit, and in body cam video you can actually physically see them moving it down to that area. So yes, that particular area was originally covered by the comforter when the crime scene unit arrived.
Okay, so I'll be able to see that on body cam if I watch the body cam again?
If you watch the one where they first were, I can tell you which one it is actually, because I have it written here. It's the body cam that is designated by X as an X-ray, 60A as an alpha, 0139, K as in kilo. It's 2 hours and 15 minutes long and 17 seconds. That is the first responder when he goes into the room and he makes contact with the Jermaine Bass, and you can actually see him get up on the lower bunk, and he gets up and he moves. You see him move his right hand, and then you see him move Jayla towards him. I believe it's also in his report that he indicates he moved the comforter. So there's two forms of documentation of that.
Okay. Do you remember the name of that officer that moved that comforter to that position?
I only have I use, when I do my reports, I use the actual time stamp from the actual body cam, because that is an actual stamp that's part of the actual physical tangible evidence when I do my report. So that's why I refer to it that way.
Okay. In terms of any testing towards the middle of the top bunk or to the eastern corner, none of that, like where we're seeing the comforter right now and any blood underneath it, none of that is actually tested though, correct?
I didn't request any of it to be tested, and I don't have any reports of it being tested.
As the same as when it's going further down onto the eastern corner where we looked at in the PowerPoint, same thing again, no testing on any of that blood except the comforter part that you asked for.
Well, on the east end, the ladder's on the east end, so there was testing done on the south rail at the east end, but these stains here, I didn't request any testing, and I didn't receive any reports of testing.
Okay. Yeah, I was talking just about the mattress
Oh, okay.
itself.
Okay.
That's certain. All right. Take that off there. Now, are you aware, in fact, that there had been some photographs taken of the interior portion of the front door?
I saw those photographs, yes.
Okay. You were not able to make any determination from those photographs, correct? It was limited, so you weren't able to do anything, correct?
I observed there's a distance, a mid-range, and a close-up photo, but there wasn't the deliberate identification with a scale. So I didn't analyze it because it wasn't identified as or tested with phenolphthalein. So
okay, that's how you got it. That other stuff would have been done before you see the photographs in your work.
Correct.
Okay. Now you have no opinion where the location of the firearm is when it is discharged, correct?
The actual physical location of the firearm? No.
No. All right. Right, and then finally, I just want to go back to the spatter mixture that we know contains the mixture of the two children, labeled P, the one on the back wall,
Okay.
right above the bunk bed. You know what I'm speaking of, right?
I do.
I don't know how to, oh, here we go. Just so we make sure there's no issue. Here is State's Exhibit 22 RRR. We are speaking and agreeing that this is P over here, green scale marker P, and this is the area you're speaking of, correct?
That's the area that was identified as the area that was tested, but that's not all of the impact spatter in that northwest corner. The impact spatter is also on the north railing, the actual physical corner, and on the west railing.
Okay.
So the actual spatter encompasses how it's. May I stand?
Yeah.
It's
Try to zoom it in for you a little bit. Does that help?
You have all this spatter here, but you can also see the spatter's all here. It's on this back wall. It's all here, and it's around here, and then it abruptly ends here. So this is the northwest corner, and you can see that the spatter encompasses this particular area, as well as it rises up in a conical formation over in this particular area. So in this area right here, the northwest corner is where the impact spatter is.
And you're taking, just for the record, you're taking your hand. We have the northwest corner where we have the large area of coagulated blood. You're taking your hand and going around above it and onto green scale marker P.
Yes, and so the impact spatter is also in proximity to this damage defect that was identified and the trajectory rod. So this particular area, so it's this northwest corner is where the spatter is.
Right. Wall and the railing is discussed.
Correct.
Okay. Do you happen to know where the exact droplet was of blood that was tested or swabbed by CSI Bader?
No, it was identified as area P, so it's going to be that particular area.
What did you take that to mean? Which part of this that you've talked about, since it's on the frame and it's near damage B, what did you take it as?
That it's the swabbing was taken in proximity to scale P, as that is customary, but Ms. Bader would be better to answer the exact location.
Okay, so you don't know the exact location, correct?
Just that it was in proximity to scale P, because that's how it was identified.
Okay, all right. So now, you're not testifying, are you, that area right there is the only spot that this gun was fired? You're not saying that, right?
I don't have an opinion as to where the gun was when it was fired. I have an opinion as to where the children's heads were when they received the injuries, which was in proximity to that northwest corner, because the impact spatter is in the northwest corner.
Which we've already talked about the proximity and all that. Right?
Correct.
Now, a gunshot wound does not always leave impact spatter, correct?
There have been situations where the scene-specific variables have prohibited it based on each scene is going to be different.
Okay. So typically, does a gunshot wound, maybe one that doesn't even have an exit, that's going to leave spatter somewhere?
Are you asking me? I prefer just to give you the opinions regarding this particular case and this situation, of which the gunshot injuries did produce impact spatter in this particular case.
Okay. And we've discussed that. But certainly, just because you see impact spatter, that does not limit shots to right there, correct?
In this particular case, the impact spatter is in the northwest corner. That would indicate the location of the injuries was in the northwest corner, proximity to the northwest corner. Very consistent with all the other evidence I reviewed and all the other bloodstains and patterns. So in this particular case, it would appear as though those were where the actual injuries were inflicted, and that's where the children laid as their injuries bled freely.
It will appear as if. Is that the term
Yes.
you just used?
Most consistent with, yes.
Okay. Do you have any kind of percentage, you think, when you have a gunshot wound of just any type of person? How many are going to leave impact spatter on something?
There's been a lot of studies, but those are done in sterile environments, so they're not relevant to individual case work. What I can do is provide you the opinion based on the evidence that I did observe in this case, which is I do have impact spatter, and I do have multiple gunshot injuries to the children's heads, head and heads, so that produced impact spatter. That's the opinion that I have for this particular case.
Okay. May I have a moment?
Yes.
Thank you. Ms. Cox, thank you so much. We don't have any further questions.
Anything else?
Hang on.
All right, you can step down, ma'am. Thank you.
Thank you.
Released from her subpoena?
Yes, Your Honor.
She is, yes. All right. Thank you. Need a quick break? All right, let's take a quick break. All rise.